I also want to underscore what you said about niching down, because I think this is something a lot of new editors struggle with is they have in their mind, if I narrow myself too much, I'm going to miss out on clients. But I think what you said about SEO is really important, that if somebody Googles academic editor, there's going to be a million pages that come up. Like you're never going to compete with these major editing agencies or, companies that are out there for that set of that keyword academic editor. But if you add in the people you serve, the types of people, the field, something specific about you, it's more likely that those results are going to come up either in a Google search, or now, of course, people are using AI to get information. And so it really is counterintuitive that, when you niche down, you become known for something.
Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. Today on the podcast, we have Cara Jordan. Cara is co-founder and chief editor at Flatpage, an editing agency and publishing house. She has a PhD in art history and is an instructor in the UCSD editing certificate program. She's also co-editor of the fabulous book, The Art of Academic Editing, which includes chapters from a variety of editors and coaches who describe their work. I highly recommend this book to anybody thinking about going into editing or book coaching. It's really helpful to, showing the landscape about what this type of work can look like. So welcome to the podcast, Cara.
Thanks so much for having me, Paulina. I really enjoy watching the podcast, and I'm glad to be here to talk to everyone today.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell us about your academic background.
Yeah, so let's see. I started grad school, as many do, young and enthusiastic. And I actually started grad school in 2008, which, as we all know, there was a big economic crash in the United States and elsewhere. So I did not come in with funding to my program, which was maybe a little bit of a misstep for me, but I did have to work all through graduate school. I went to the City University of New York, so I was right in the epicenter of it all, and I needed to make a lot of money in order to be able to support my student lifestyle. As you said, I studied art history, so I started to work in artist studios. I became a freelancer pretty much right away, and I was really engaged in working with text, and specifically working with text written by artists. I was fortunate enough to start working for an artist named Peter Halley, which actually have his book right here behind me. I published his catalog Raisonné after I finished grad school, but he was a very prolific writer and he published many, many books. So I started to do a lot of editing, especially when I was working for him. So I got a lot of experience in the editorial world while I was in graduate school. And then when I was writing my dissertation, I started to expand into other academic realms and working with people in my cohort and other people who are art historians specifically. And so it sort of became a natural progression for me to get into this space when I graduated, which I think was around 2015. I also moved abroad during that time. So I was, teaching, doing the adjunct thing. I had considered going into academia, but I felt like at the end of my degree, it really didn't jive for me that I was going to become a professor. Given that experience, I think for all the reasons that people state, we love teaching, but we tend to not like the politics of it all. And that's only gotten worse since I graduated. In any case, I was also a trailing spouse. And so I needed to be able to be mobile, and I couldn't take an academic job that was just anywhere. And in my field, especially, it's highly competitive, and people tend to take jobs all over the country, not just in the major hubs where I might have to be located in order to have my family. So, yeah, I guess after I graduated, I sort of dipped my toe into academia, but decided it really wasn't for me, and that I had been doing this freelancing thing all along, and that I could just continue doing that. So it really sort of spiked up from there. And, I wouldn't say that it was right away that I was able to do this full time. We could talk about that. It took me a few years to get up a solid client base to become a full-time freelance editor. But I really did put my heart and soul into it and started marketing myself. And that, I guess, is the beginning of my story out of academia. Put it that way.
Yeah. So I'm curious, where did you get your initial work? Did you go right into trying to attract private clients, or who were your first clients and projects?
Yeah, so like I said, I worked for artists. So I had a really solid background in that. And I started to get a lot of word of mouth clients that way. And I think, having talked to a lot of editors at this point, many people get their work not only when they first start, but throughout their career through word of mouth. That's gold in our community. So it started out through artists. And then I started to tell people in grad school that I was doing this as a freelance thing on the side. And if they had a dissertation or a book that they were working on, that they could come to me. And then it just sort of rippled out that they would tell their colleagues. My professors in my program found out about it. And then once I graduated, actually, I took the UCSD program in copy editing. So that really sort of solidified that not only was this something that I was interested in and I was sort of doing to support myself, but that it was something that I had training in. So once I started to do that, I started to get a lot more clients that way.
So at what point I think word of mouth works or can work for a long time, but at some point it runs out, right? Did you experience that, or how did you make the shift to learning how to market yourself?
So first of all, I don't think it runs out. Now that I'm in a completely different point in my career, we still get the majority of our clients from word of mouth and people spreading the word that they've done work with us, and that, we do really good work. And I think news spreads that way. I think that it would be great if we could just all put up a website, and that would attract the majority of our client base. Or, if I said to you that taking a class in marketing really helped me to determine that. Yes, starting a business is extremely difficult, and you do have to learn some of those skills in order to get different types of clients. I think especially if you're trying to get outside of what I would call your comfort zone. So maybe your academic niche or the types of people that you already surround yourself with. So say you're a graduate student. If you want to get outside of just working for graduate students, you have to start getting out there, attending events. You have to, as you said, start a website. You have to get on the editorial communities and start not only putting a listing on their directories, but also engaging with people. And I also think that networking with other editors is extremely important and perhaps overlooked. I always tell the students in my program, get to know each other here now. And that way down the road, if you have a project that you can't take on, that you can hand it off to somebody who you can have confidence that they're going to be able to complete it in a way that you perhaps might, or that you would want to recommend to your client, that they're going to get the same level of work. So engaging in those networks is really good. Yeah, I think that and then once you start to get in a different level, which maybe some people don't ever want to get to, then you start thinking about paid advertisements and that kind of thing. But that's a level that some people just don't want to engage with.
Yeah, I never thought ads would be effective for editors. I use them for my course because I'm trying to reach specific people, academics who are burned out. But I definitely agree that ads are probably not the right approach for somebody looking for editing clients. But I feel like so many editors have this stumbling block, or like you said, this resistance to getting out of their comfort zone of like they're comfortable maybe going to a conference and handing out their business cards or, emailing people that they know. But there is this like very common deep fear of even making a post on LinkedIn or something like that. And I've noticed it among so many editors that they think that word of mouth will provide enough work to sustain their career and that they're not going to have to do anything else. And I feel like that's why so many people struggle financially, because they're just not willing to put themselves out there. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned events. Like I feel like there's so many different ways that that a person can choose, like not like we were talking before we started recording, not everybody's into TikTok, like you don't have to be dancing on Instagram Reels or something. But whether it's blogging or, just telling stories about your work on LinkedIn, there's so many options out there. And I feel like we don't talk about that enough in the editing communities. We're talking about commas and semicolons and references lists and citation styles, but there's really very little conversation that I've seen about what are the successful ways to raise your rates and bring in clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think that being an editor has some similarities with being an academic, at least in my fields and maybe in the humanities in general, in that you're doing a lot of these activities solitary, like you're behind your computer, you're doing research, you're in a library. And a lot of the reasons why that attracts certain people is because, you get to do things on your own, you're self-directed. But then when you start a business, and even as a solo entrepreneur, I think you're starting a business, and that's extremely important to recognize that there's different activities that you have to do to that necessarily are going to be different. A lot of people struggle with the marketing, I think, and it's even similar to when you're publishing an academic book. It's a lot is on your shoulders to promote the book and to get on podcasts and to email people. In that sense, though, you're talking about your academic specialization, which you've gone through all these years of schooling, you've published a dissertation, maybe a couple books. You feel confident that if someone asks you a question on a podcast or for an interview, that you could, relatively easily answer it. And I feel like, especially when people are new to editing and you're sort of figuring out what is your niche, you don't always have all of the right answers. And so maybe there's like a trepidation of putting yourself out there. Like, can I put out content that people are going to be interested in? Is it going to be at the level where it shows my expertise or, level of skill in this in a way that's competitive with the rest of the marketplace? By the way, there are a lot of editors out there who say they've been doing it for 25 years who don't pass my editorial test. So I think that, and there's some people who have been very new, and the opposite is the case, that they're really good and they are just really naturally talented at it. So I think there's like a lot of different ways that we can engage online, especially because that's where a lot of our marketing is going to be. But now that we're back from COVID fully and there's in-person events, I really do think that in-person events, and I'm sure some of your other interviewees have told you, definitely get out there and go and talk to people at events. And don't be afraid. I mean, you already have the academic background, you already have the chops. And now it's really just about saying, I'm putting this towards something else that is also of value. The other thing that I want to add is that marketing to academics is extremely difficult, as I'm sure you're aware. There are not a lot of areas where you can actually reach the academic community with like hard advertisement. You can't post on listservs. There's not like magazines necessarily, unless you're thinking of like the Journal of Higher Ed or something like that. The communities that we create for ourselves as academics are extremely closed off. So you have to use creative means in order to access them. So that means like talking to people is really super important. You can't really ignore that part.
Yeah, I agree. Something I had a lot of success with early on was I would I was already in a bunch of academic groups on Facebook just because I am an academic. And I would see posts from people asking about, have you ever hired an editor? Can you recommend someone? And I just started responding in comments saying, hey, I'm a former professor and now I'm an editor and here's my website. And that was a lot of work because, sitting on Facebook scrolling posts is not my favorite thing to do in the world. But it also, I realized it wasn't just the poster who was seeing my comment. It was everybody else who was reading that post and reading the comments or searching the group, for if they need an editor or something like that. So yeah, I completely agree. People need to get creative and do what works for them, what's comfortable for them. So you obviously had a lot of success. Tell us about how you grew your business and eventually started the agency.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important to niche down for people. And I think that's really what helped me in my business and other people that I see. And I'll give you another example that's outside of me just to make the point. I once hired an editor who was based in LA and who had worked on TV shows. And they grew this community around them of humor writers. And they went to the UCSD copy editing program. When they graduated, they started a website and they marketed themselves as a humor editor. And pretty much right away, they had more than enough work that they could ever do and were like full time. And for me, it took a lot longer. I, like you, this was back in the Facebook age. I'm not sure if that tactic still works. Somebody will have to say in the comments if that's the case. But I think marketing myself as an art history editor meant that people who were looking for that online were able to find me. And search engine optimization is hugely important to people whose business is remote and online, like ours. And so marketing yourself as something that you do, and whether that be the background that you have or the types of manuscripts you work on or the types of clients that you work with, all of that should be a part of everything that you put out about yourself online. And in my case, that was what I did. I set up a website. I called myself an art historian editor. I marketed the fact that I had a PhD in this field, which there's debate as to whether or not you need to have a PhD to be an editor, which we could talk about, I guess. But I think in my case, it really attracted people who also had PhDs and who were looking for somebody who was competent that could actually do this to a level, wasn't just like testing it out as an amateur, which is totally fine. But for me, I also experienced ups and downs. And I think anybody getting into freelance is going to notice that there's, highs and lows to the freelance career, whether you're a web designer, whether you're a dancer, whatever you do as a freelancer, it always has highs and lows. So it's preparing for that as being part of, this journey. But when COVID hit in 2020, it was disastrous for many of us. I think people didn't know what their economic situation was going to be. A lot of academics were pulling back and, focusing more on writing and less on actually publishing a book because their editorial staff weren't in the university press, were also like quieting down. So in my case, I decided to sort of double down. And I said, I've been doing this for, I don't know how many years at that point, 10 years. Let me just see if I can gather together a team of other people who are like me, who also have PhDs. And it started out in art and art history. So other people with PhDs in that area. And then we can sort of gather our resources and I can take on more clients that way. So instead of me saying, okay, I'm going to refer my work out, and then perhaps never see that client again, I would say, okay, I have this team of editors. What type of service are you looking for? And it allowed me to expand the number of clients that I worked with, the amount of services that I was able to provide. And it allowed me to retain a lot more clients than I was able to do previously, because I would just see people fly away. Not for anything that I did, but just you get comfortable working with somebody and they just don't end up coming back to you a lot of times. So it really grew from there. And we started in about 2020 and really officially formed in the next couple of years after that. and have just expanded our team to include a lot more fields within the humanities and social sciences and several of the other services. Because, as you mentioned, I'm a copy editor. That's sort of my bread and butter. That's what I know. I did some developmental editing and took some classes in that, but realized that my area is copy editing. It's where I feel the most comfortable. It's where my skills are. So I think it's great to be able to work with a team who has a wide variety of competences to be able to give a client like the full sort of 360 for their manuscript.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a copy editor too, and I feel like they're very much two different camps. Like, the people who love to copy edit really aren't thrilled to do the developmental editing and vice versa. So it's great that you have and the client gets more eyes on their manuscript, right? They're going to get feedback from different perspectives and people with different strengths and skills. I also want to underscore what you said about niching down, because I think this is something a lot of new editors struggle with is they have in their mind, if I narrow myself too much, I'm going to miss out on clients. But I think what you said about SEO is really important, that if somebody Googles academic editor, there's going to be a million pages that come up. Like, you're never going to compete with these major editing agencies or, companies that are out there for that set of that keyword academic editor. But if you add in the people you serve, the types of people, the field, something specific about you, it's more likely that those results are going to come up either in a Google search, or now, of course, people are using AI to get information. And so it really is counterintuitive that, when you niche down, you become known for something. It builds trust because people know that you're an expert in that field as an academic. I don't think somebody has to have a PhD to be an editor, certainly, but I think there is some kind of camaraderie, I guess, that happens where an academic is looking for an editor and they see that you have a PhD and you have that empathy for what they're going through. And I do think that seems to help with that relationship. But yeah, becoming known for something is so much more powerful than trying to be everything to everybody.
Yeah, I'm actually developing a class for the UCSD program about academic editing that's sort of based off the book that Leslie Castro Woodhouse and I published last year. And the more I'm realizing, it's like, yeah, we expect that all of our editors are at least going to have a master's degree, if not a PhD. And part of that is for marketing because we use it for SEO, but also it is about connecting with that client and understanding not only, the writing process as an academic, the publishing process as an academic, but our use of language is extremely specific, and it varies for different fields. So somebody who does things for, I don't know, social sciences and humanities, just to get general terms, they build their journal articles differently. So I think understanding that means that if you don't have that academic background, you're going to have to do much more work to figure out what those conventions are in the publication world, in the writing world, et cetera. So you're going to have to familiarize yourself with all that writing. I can't imagine wanting to read those things for fun. If you were going to get a degree out of it, but you do have to familiarize yourself with it, and you do have to understand the way that we speak. It's very specific. And if you change somebody's words, which academics generally tend to frown on someone changing the way that they're saying something, then that can be to your detriment, and you lose trust from your client if you do that.
So I know you're an advocate of editors getting that formal training, as an editing certificate. Do you want to talk about that? So, because what I'm hearing you say is to be really successful, an editor has to have both the academic understanding of how we speak, how we do our work, and also the formal editing training. So is that right? And why do you think it's important for them to have the training as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be great if we could just translate our skills from the PhD or from being a professor into the editorial world. And some things definitely transfer, but other things just don't. just to think about, the role that you would play as a professor grading someone's papers is very different than I would play as a copy editor on someone's manuscript. You're looking at the manuscript in completely different ways. And it's the same way as you look at a manuscript differently as a professor than you do as a peer reviewer. So in the editorial world, we really are not necessarily looking at the content and helping them increase the number of sources or support for their sources in the same ways that a professor or peer reviewer might. If you're a developmental editor, you're looking at several different categories when you're analyzing a manuscript. You're looking at the overall arguments, the overall organization structure, how the argument is supportive, if it's supported enough, the writing voice of the piece. And these are things that, yes, some people are naturally talented at translating that academic experience into creating a service out of it. But for most of us, it means that we need to do some training to understand what the difference is. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when you go into a different field, because editorial is a different field, there are going to be some gaps there. And I really believe that academics going into the editorial space need to have that sort of filter to understand what it is that editors do and how they do their job. And I see a lot of people who come to our agency, Flatpage, and they say, oh, I've been grading papers for, however many years, 20 years. So I know how to copy edit. That is really not the case. Copy editing is extremely mechanical. You have to know these style books backwards and forwards. You have to be able to do it in a certain amount of time. You have to be aware of all these professional conventions that we have in terms of terminology, how to work with a client, how to use a style sheet, how to get access to technical aspects of our field. And those are things that you learn when you're in one of these certificate programs, which it's absolutely fabulous that these exist. I can imagine that most people had to learn copy editing probably through journalism. I can't imagine what they did previous to these programs. But it's not just about familiarizing yourself with the Chicago Manual of Style. There's a lot more to it. And at least at Flatpage, I do hire people who it's usually, I want to say like 90% of the people on our team have one of those certificates or have taken a formalized course in one of the areas so that I know and can have confidence that they are doing the work that I need them to do.
Yeah, so I agree that there's a difference between, grading or even giving feedback on a dissertation, when the student is your advisee or something like that. When I started, I really had no idea that copy editing existed until I wrote my book and worked with a freelancer with NewGen for, because we were publishing with Routledge. And I don't remember the first place I got hurt. It might have been Scribendi. And I know a lot of people have conflicting opinions about them, but my experience was really positive. And they had a training program. This was like 2020, I think, because they've been sold since then. So I don't know what's happening, but they had a training program where you would go through and watch their videos and take the quizzes. And I think you were paid like $10 an hour or something. So it was nothing, but you were getting paid instead of having to pay for it, which was nice. And it did explain a lot, everything from grammar rules and citation styles to like how to phrase your comments when you're leaving feedback on a document. And I think you're right that those are things that do need to be learned, especially the question, which I see a lot of people struggle with, is what's the fine line of how much do I edit? How much do I leave alone? Obviously we want to correct errors and typos and those kinds of things. But if it's a question about clarity or flow, there's a way to sort of finesse those changes that preserves the author's voice, but also improves the paper and makes sure that it makes sense. So yeah, so I agree. The thing I think that is a sticking point for me is that so many of these programs are like thousands of dollars and they cover so much. And what I've heard from people who have taken them is that, yes, there are things that are helpful, but there's a lot, if you are an academic, that is kind of redundant that you already know about the publishing process and things like that. And so the second half of that for me is we ask people to pay all this money for a certificate, but we don't actually teach them how to get clients. And I don't know, maybe that's shifting. You teach in the program, so you can say, if you guys cover any kind of marketing or anything, but I feel like we're asking people to put up all this money and then we're not giving them an actual path to success to earn it back.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can really only speak from the UCSD perspective because I took that certificate and I also now teach there. And I only know about the other programs through other people, like mainly my editors who work for me who have done them. UCSD, I think, is one of the more affordable programs out there. It was why I chose it. It was entirely remote. Some of them are not entirely remote. And I think having that in-person experience makes it perhaps more expensive, but also some people learn better that way. So, I mean, I can't knock it, I guess. We at UCSD have a pretty bare bones program in that you have like a grammar class. And then there's a suite of 3 copy editing stages, 1, 2, and 3. And I teach the last one, copy editing 3, which is the most advanced one, where you actually work on a manuscript. It's like a pseudo academic text. So a lot of people come to the program without any experience in editing, and some people have a lot of experience. So there's a bit of a mix there. And they all meet on the discussion boards and talk about topics. And I don't think that there's ever been someone that has come through any of my classes who has not come away learning something about the process, how to handle a difficult client, how to approach plagiarism in a manuscript, how to write a letter to the author when you're sending back your edits. These are all things that, like, at least in my case, there was very few professional opportunities to learn these types of things back when I became an editor. So I sort of had to do trial and error and have, clients get upset at me over things, do things wrong, make a lot of mistakes. Now there's so many opportunities for you to learn these types of skills in safe environments where you can make mistakes, where you can call someone out for committing plagiarism in their manuscript, which personally as a copy editor, I think you need to be tread a lot more lightly on that situation. But, I think that the financial contribution that you're making, which I wouldn't call it thousands of dollars. I mean, I think it's maybe like 2,500, something around that area. Maybe changed since in the past few years, but I think it's been fully worth it to my career because you get to tell people that you have this professional certificate. It's not certification, a certificate. Canada has certifications. We don't have certification in the US. And that really adds credibility to who you are as an editor to have that kind of thing. In UCSD, we also have a business of editing class, which is an elective. And there the students do a business plan, which is also something that your PhD program doesn't teach you anything about starting a business unless you're in that sort of area. So I didn't know how to run a business. To be honest, they added that class after I had already taken the certificate, but their students do learn about that aspect of how to get clients. And personally, as an instructor in the program, I offer office hours on Zoom where my students come. And usually the hottest topic of conversation is, okay, now we're finishing the program. What do we do next? How do we start getting clients? Is it worth it for me to do work for free? Should I sign up? Which editorial association would be the best for me? This question that you're talking about niching always comes up. And I find that that's also really beneficial for the students to learn from the instructors.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it can be very lonely in the beginning, especially when you're starting to learn this. And like there's the Facebook groups and stuff, but I guess I never joined the EFA or any of the organizations. Looking back, I should have, but they offer some support. But I think it is really helpful to your students to be able to sit in an office hours setting with them and for them to ask you questions. And I think also that's very familiar to us as academics, right? They probably feel very comfortable reaching out to you in that way when they may not feel comfortable, going to an EFA workshop or something in a room full of people and asking, beginner questions or something. So that's great that you offer that. I'm very curious to know, how did you decide to add publishing to your list of services at Flatpage?
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder of Flatpage. I have a partner, his name is David Hariri, and he's really the visionary and the driving force behind our publishing. So I would say a few years ago, we started talking about, we work with all these clients and they're publishing books. We know so much about the publication process. We're seeing so many manuscripts and amazing ideas. Why don't we start publishing books, and why don't we start helping actually people get their books and their ideas out there? So that was sort of the, seed of it. And we published this book, The Art of Academic Editing, which you mentioned, which is really based on our experience as editors. And we got people to write chapters in all of the service areas that are useful to academics at this point in time. Maybe some things will change. But that experience of writing and then publishing this book prompted us to really want to get out there and to publish more ideas, more scholars who are looking to access a general audience, journalists who are writing stories that they are longer than, a magazine or a newspaper article will allow. And behind that is really sort of what's the driving force behind our agency is helping people get their ideas out there. And I think there are multiple ways that we can engage with an academic community. And there's multiple ways to get people to think critically in this world. And I think a lot of that has been lost, be that through technology, be that through a political situation that we find ourselves in, that we really found that as Flatpage, we can help people in this way. So we actually just published our second book, which came out yesterday, was our publication date. And it's written by a historian at Florida Atlantic University named Christopher Strain. And the book is about America's mass shooting problem. And the great thing about this book is that it proposes solutions. And I think that is really different from the type of book that you would see coming out of the university press world, which would be really like steeped in jargon and, maybe charts, data, all that type of stuff. And it's really speaking to a very specific community. And we wanted to publish a book that might help influence policy, might help change the minds of people in your family. As we're going into the holiday season, we're sitting around the table as family. We want to have something that everybody can read and can get something out of. And we really think that academics have so much to contribute. And if we're just thinking about the only way that they can express their ideas is through these very niche places like the academic journal or the university press, then we're really missing out on so many ways that they can contribute to society. So we just wanted to add a way that they can do that through Flatpage publishing.
I love that. That's such an interesting way that you're combining the editorial process with advocacy. I was a U.S. politics professor, which I am very glad I am not anymore. But I was always frustrated because academia in our department, and not just the specific departments I was in, but just the field of U.S. politics was so stripped of its relationship to reality. Like we were supposed to be these outside observers, and of course you want to approach your work with objectivity and take an empirical look at everything, but I often felt like nobody outside of our own networks are reading these things. Like why are we doing all this if we're not speaking to the world about the things that are important? So I love how you phrased about that book. The title was Gunocracy. Is that what it was?
Yeah, Gunocracy, which we thought was an amazing sort of neologism. I mean, he didn't come up with it, but it's great. guns and bureaucracy, if you will, and how it's embedded in our society. Because everyone, gun owners and non-gun owners alike, agree that this is a problem. So, and just taking away the guns is not gonna happen realistically. So, how can we actually solve it? And he comes up with solutions from like the everyday to like things that are wildly ambitious and we love to think about. But, I think it's a great contribution and I hope everyone reads it. Not just us, I mean, not just to sell the book, of course, but we're, hoping that policymakers do read it and that it changes some minds about things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I'll put a link to that as well in the show notes and people can check it out. So, as we wrap up, I traditionally ask folks if you have one or two pieces of advice for someone who's listening, who's thinking about getting into academic editing or book coaching, what would you recommend to them as they're starting out on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned that I think that people need to do some professional development of some sort related to it, whether you've already started doing a few projects or you are just sort of testing the waters. I think it's valuable to look into those. And there are various options. Actually, for our Art of Academic Editing book, we do have a resources list that includes a list of various programs that people can take based on the editorial specialization. And I also think niching down and thinking about what type of service would be the best for you based on the types of things that you like to do in your everyday world. As you're saying, there are some people that are really good at the big picture and helping people with the organization. Those people tend not to be the same person who is a copy editor or proofreader. It's just very different ways of engaging with the text. Definitely cannot be done at the same time, no matter how much a client wants that to happen, just doesn't. So thinking about which type of person are you, testing it out on some manuscripts, maybe working for some friends. I often get the question about whether or not people should do work for free. And I'm sort of a believer in this, like, three-prong filter. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this, that there has to be some sort of value, whether that value is because of your passion for the project, whether it's because there's some sort of intangible value, like you are gaining a skill, like you need more skills in editing, so you're doing it because of that. Or there has to be some sort of strategic element, like you're getting a good networking opportunity or something. So I think at least if two of those are met for you for a project, I'm certainly fine with people doing work for free. There's nothing wrong with that. But just make sure that there is some sort of value coming back to you for it. I think there is something to be said about working for those websites or other agencies where you're sort of pulled together with other editors. But I will say, insofar as, we're an agency at Flatpage and we have a lot of editors, the nature of working as a freelancer at our business is quite codified by the state. And we have to hire people who are skilled and can do the work on their own. We can't train them. We can train employees, but we can't train our contractors. So that means that I do rigorous tests with my editors to make sure that they are up to par and can do the work on their own. It's the same way that you wouldn't hire someone to build your house who had never built a house before. I really interview people, I give them test edits, everything like that. So we aren't able to offer training in the same way that you would if you were going to become an employee. And I also think that, a lot of people hope that there's going to be maybe full-time work or something out of this that makes it stable. Those are hard to come by, I would say. If you're wanting that, then you might have to go outside your field. Like I knew an art historian who decided to become a technical editor, which is quite well paid, but it has nothing to do with what she trained for. She just wanted more stable employment. So that's good. But I think that as a freelancer, if you're hoping to stay in that space and you want to grow, the real key that I've seen is finding long-term contracts that will give you ongoing work that you can rely on as much as we can these days, I guess, with budgets happening the way that they are. But I think that's really the way that you should push your business, and to, we're thinking about networking and how to grow and how to stabilize. And that is what I've seen as the way to really do it.
Yeah, those are some great suggestions. Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this conversation. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. We also post a lot of educational materials on our Flatpage Instagram, and we also have a LinkedIn page for Flatpage there. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. I do sometimes do informational interviews, but it's difficult as I'm so busy these days. But, for sure, connect with me somehow.
Great. Thanks so much, Cara.
Thank you.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.